Hello everyone and welcome back to Plane Time. And this is segment 2, and we're going to get into a little bit more of the meat and potatoes of the FAASTeam activities and things that you can get involved with from a very, very remote level. You don't have to be there to do it. You can be on this thing right here and get just about as much education as going. Remember going and sitting in the library, or does that show my age? We used to go to the library to study. Don't have to do that anymore. And we're going to pick up, you're going to see so much energy flowing through these next 2 segments. The first one's kind of a warm-up. And Bob Jex, our guest today, is a little bit shy. So we're going to pull him out of his shell a little bit here and talk about some of the things that the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee has come up with. A monthly program that drills into things that have been identified that have had an impact on aviation safety, usually negative. And unfortunately, we can talk about all the fun stuff about flying around and it's beautiful looking down on the clouds, it really is, until things go wrong. And then it's horrifying. So let's take a little bit of the bad, a little bit of the good, and mix it up and see what Bob Jex can share with us on segment 2. Bob, take it away.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here on set with you and the Florida Aviation Network. One of the things that we do in FAASTeam, the FAA safety team, is we work with a nationally directed program called the National Performance Plan. And it's about 50 different projects that cover an entire fiscal year. So we're well into fiscal year 23, which started on October 1st and ends on September 30th. One of the things that we have within the National Performance Plan is a program of monthly, what they call topics of the month, that are given to us by the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee, the GAJSC, if you will. This is a panel of real subject matter experts, people that are passionate about aviation safety. Some of them are from government, some of them are from industry, some of them are from academia. They get together from time to time, they come up with a list of topics that are of huge concern for aviation safety. Many times they've been causal factors or contributing factors to general aviation accidents. And so they come up with a plan for the year ahead, and they actually develop media, PowerPoint slideshows and talking points for these topics. They call them topics of the month. And they are combined into one of our National Performance Plan topics, specifically NPP14, but that's not important. What we do is we get this message out to the FAASTeam volunteers, the lead reps, and the FAASTeam service providers. We make this information available to them so that they can put it out in monthly seminars or webinars if they'd like to, so that they can reach out to their circles of influence and get these messages out to the public on the accident prevention side of things. And so for the fiscal year 23, we have 12 topics of the month, and I'd like to go through that list with you just on a thumbnail on each one.
By memory, Bob, by memory.
Well, I'm going to fail that test. I'm going to fail that test.
You were doing so well, I had to trip you up. I had to trip you up.
But I love this concept of a nationally distributed joint steering committee plan of action. And this is important not just within the Orlando FSDO, this is important throughout the country. And so I want to share this list with you because maybe the listeners may say, hey, I'd like to have a presentation on that at my airport next month. I'd like to have one of those FAASTeam guys come out and deliver this presentation, or maybe I'm listening and maybe I pick it up in my email and there is a presentation, a seminar coming down the pike to an airport near me covering this. All good, all reasons to be paying attention to this list of 12 topics that I want to share with you. The first one that they gave us for October, but it's not important that it's October. You could do it in September of next year if you want to. Aeromedical. There are many aspects of the aeromedical endeavor that are important to pilots. Getting your next medical certificate, getting your medical certificate renewed. What about prohibited medications? Is your cardiologist prescribing for you a medication that is a showstopper for becoming a pilot in command of an aircraft. That is covered in the aeromedical topic of the month. We have media all ready to go for you. The next month's topic is planned continuation bias and what we call CFIT, controlled flight into terrain. There are many cases where a pilot has decided to continue a flight against his better judgment and better knowledge that should have been known, information that should have been known. They continue a flight where they should not have, and sometimes fly a perfectly flyable aircraft into the side of a mountain. It has happened, and it is a concern to the Joint Steering Committee.
Bob, is planned continuous bias or continuous? That sounds like a really fancy term of flying into something.
Well, planned continuation bias isn't addressing flying into something, but it's the decision that a pilot makes to continue flying when maybe they should have changed their plan, proceeded to an alternate, turned around, gone back to their origination point, and landed safely. Instead, maybe they decide through planned continuation bias, I've got to get there. I have to keep going.
I'm going to get there if it kills me. And in some cases
sometimes it does.
Yeah.
And we call that sometimes controlled flight into terrain. And it's tragic when it happens. We are there as a FAASTeam and a network of volunteers. We're there to help prevent that from happening. Our next month's topic of the month is performance calculations. How many people have taken off and really gone into the book and calculated where their center of gravity was through a weight and balance determination? Were you over gross weight, or were you within the maximum allowable gross weight? And was the CG within the allowable range? CG means center of gravity. It is the balance point. If you could take your airplane and tip it on your finger and balance it, the balance point is known as the center of gravity. And it's important that center of gravity be within limits that are known by the manufacturer and published in documents like the type certificate data sheet and the pilot's operating handbook. But how many pilots go in there and willingly make those calculations on where the weight and balance determination is? How much room are you going to need? How much runway are you going to need to take off? And then, hopefully, at the end of a successful flight, how much runway are you going to need to land that aircraft safely on the runway again? Performance calculation is one of our topics of the month, given
Bob,
to us by the Joint Aviation Steering Committee.
Can I go back to your demonstration?
The balance point.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You know, that was a helicopter. You know,
Well,
in a
it could
helicopter,
be.
you got lateral and longitudinal considerations for your balance.
Doesn't
like stand
come
up
up
on a football.
Sure.
Right back. Yeah, so put a football up on
because the helicopter has a rotary wing. A standard airplane or a glider has a fixed wing, and so we don't often talk about lateral balance, but in some of the aircraft that are out there, and I talked about the Prowler in the last segment, it does matter how much weight imbalance is there from left to right. In a general aviation aircraft, it's not that critical, and so you don't see that entering into performance calculations, but you sure do see the longitudinal weight distribution entering into the performance calculations, for sure. Our next topic of the month is Safety Risk Management, or SRM. Not to be confused with Single Pilot Resource Management, which is another SRM. Safety Risk Management is a comprehensive look at all the factors that go into decision making, usually ahead of the flight and often during the flight. Safety Risk Management, a topic of the month. Next, we have transition training. That aircraft might not be new, but that aircraft is new to you. Maybe it's a complex airplane that has retractable landing gear and a controllable pitch propeller. If you're used to flying Cherokees and Cessna 172s, you haven't been flying complex airplanes. But now you're getting ready to get into an Aero or a Bonanza or perhaps a Baron that has multiple engines or controllable pitch props, retractable landing gear. That aircraft might not be new, but it's new to you. And before you take off as pilot in command of that aircraft, you need what's called transition training. It's a huge risk area that the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee has identified for us with sufficient imperative that it be one of our topics of the month. And we offer that for free to our volunteers.
And in some cases in the airlines, they call it differences training.
Exactly.
You may fly a 737
Yep.
300,
Yep.
but you hop into
Difference is
737
training.
800, you're going to talk about a different animal there. It might look the same, but
Sure.
it's different under the covers.
All these topics of the month that I'm talking to you about, we have pre-made media that the audience can benefit from. It's standardized, it's developed at National FAASTeam headquarters, and it's brought out through the internet to the FAASTeam program managers. We download it onto flash drives that our volunteers send to us, and we send those flash drives out to our volunteers. They take that national media, they can tweak it a little bit for local variations and put that same message out to the local audiences. So all you really need to get the benefit of this training is a little bit of your time. And you might be willing to drive to the airport or wherever the venue is that we're holding the training. Come on out, we're happy to have you. And lo and behold, you're going to get some WINGS credit too. We talked about the WINGS program. That is the Pilot Proficiency Award program. And you'll get WINGS credit for attending these Topics of the Month presentations.
And it's free.
It's free. It costs you nothing but your time. The WINGS program itself is one of our Topics of the Month, and we're very happy to bring that to you in more detail. I myself have prepared a lot of media discussing the WINGS program because as an Ops FAASTeam program manager, it's kind of the center of my universe. I get a huge charge out of bringing the WINGS program and sharing it with other people. Did you know you can actually get jewelry for completing WINGS phases? There's a WINGS pin for basic, one for advanced, and one for master. And this is not known by very many people, but the Seaplane Pilots Association has produced Sea WINGS pins that you can earn for completing WINGS phases. The Avemco Insurance Agency produces the WINGS pins, and I wanted to give a shout out to both Avemco and the Seaplane Pilots Association for their long-standing support of the FAASTeam and the aviation safety efforts that we are in the middle of. Best glide speed is one of our Topics of the Month. If your engine quits, what speed do you use for the best glide range? That's your best glide speed, but there's a lot that goes into it. And a lot of pilots either forgot it or never heard it in the first place. The glider community also has to think about best glide speed because in many cases they never had an engine to start with. Some of them have retractable engines, but for most gliders, your performance is based on how well you glide between thermals. Certainly in Central Florida, we're thinking about thermals. Where's the next thermal? Where's that next rising column of air coming from? Sometimes we find the birds where they're thermaling to find out where our next source of lift is. But what about when the thermal peaks out and you have to get to the next one? You have to fly at your best glide speed. So the best glide speed presentation is applicable not only to the airplane community, but to the glider community as well.
Energy management.
Energy management, a subject near and dear to my heart. Here's one for you, Ben. The $300 annual. $300 sounds like a lot of money, but I see a snicker in there. Ben knows, and the audience would know, or should know, and they certainly will know after watching the presentation on the $300 annual. A $300 annual is like a $50 paint job on your car. Yep. It is a cheap annual, and the guy who does a $300 annual is probably missing a lot of things. And we want to bring the audience into awareness of the caveats of a cheap annual. Don't go cheap on your annual. Get a good, thorough annual, and we demonstrate through bad examples called the $300 annual. We demonstrate through bad examples what not to do.
You're going to get me cranked up, aren't you, Bob?
I would love to get you spooled up, Ben. Ben?
We don't have enough time. We don't have enough time today.
I know. These topics are given to us by a very important committee called the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee, and they are all grouped into one of our national performance plans for the entire fiscal year. Let me get on to another one. Regulatory roadblock reduction, RRR. This is another subject that is near and dear to my heart. Sometimes people are thwarted in their efforts to do the right thing because of regulations that they perceive are getting in the way. There are programs out there like the NORC program, and I know you've heard of the NORC program. This is a program that allows us to bring from industry some good ideas. One of the most important ones is angle of attack. to get angle of attack instrumentation and systems into general aviation cockpits by minimizing the amount of regulatory compliances that are needed. The NORSE program helps tunnel through those regulations and legally bring new technologies to the cockpit where they can start saving lives much more quickly. One of the best examples I can bring of that is the angle of attack instrumentation. You may remember Bendix King was one of the first manufacturers to bring it. They have this black egg. It's just about the size of this coffee mug, and it sits right up there on your glare shield, and it has color-coded symbology representing an aircraft's angle of attack. The Navy does angle of attack. We used it in carrier landings all the time, but general aviation is kind of new to the party, and they could use angle of attack in stall and spin prevention. And so these new systems are getting out there into the general aviation fleet. We're very happy to see that. The regulatory roadblock reduction presentation discusses some of this and some of the programs like NORSE that bring these systems to fruition out in the general aviation industry. Fly the aircraft first is another one of our topics of the month. If you have an engine failure suddenly, what is the most important thing? Obviously, aviate, navigate, communicate. There's some considerations involved in transitioning from a normal situation to an abnormal or emergency situation, and the pilot needs to be mindful of those all the time. Fly the aircraft first brings some of those important concepts to the training table for one of our topics of the month. Weather, a huge topic and a huge risk within aviation. Even in Florida, where the weather is flyable nearly 365 days out of the year, weather is a huge factor in planning a safe and successful flight. Weather cameras are being installed all over the country, and they're being introduced airport by airport, especially up in Alaska, where there's a lot of insular environment as far as planning. In Florida, we don't need to worry about remoteness of airfields, but we do need to worry about the weather, especially in the summertime when summertime thunderstorms can really pop up. Weather considerations and weather headwork is one of our General Aviation Joint Steering Committee topics of the month. And finally, rounding out the fiscal year, a subject near and dear to your heart, Ben, pre-flight after maintenance. What did the mechanic miss? Did he crisscross the cables on the controls during that annual where the aircraft was all torn apart? Yes, folks, it has happened, and when it does, it's tragic, but it can be prevented through a much more careful pre-flight, especially when that aircraft comes out of maintenance. And Benji, I'll bet you could teach that presentation.
Bob, I'd like to put a challenge out there. Rather than the pre-flight maintenance check, if the mechanic that did the annual took it up the first time for its return to service flight, I doubt that would even show up on your list there, because that's really the true key of being the ultimate airman, mechanic, pilot, dispatcher, the whole myriad of what it takes to be a ultimate airman. That's a different subject. Might write a book on that someday. Go ahead.
Very good. Well, that rounds out our list of 12 topics of the month given to us by the GAJSC. What we do is we put them into, sometimes ahead of other presentations, sometimes it's the whole presentation itself. These programs, these topics of the month are designed to be vignettes lasting 10, 15, 20 minutes. But a good presenter will turn it over to audience questions, and the questions and answers that follow the main presentation can bring a presentation to a much longer period of time, and that's fine with us. If the audience goes away with their knowledge improved and their questions answered, we may have prevented an accident, and that's what it's all about.
I'll share a conversation I had at the copy machine back when I was with FSDO. And there were some, believe it or not, back with the old safety program days, or it used to be the APPM. Obi, you remember the APPM? Accident Prevention Program. Inspector came up to me, and I was making some, of course, copies. And he said, Ben, you guys spend an awful lot of time out there, and you know, we could really use you back into certificate management, but why are you doing all this safety stuff? And I said, well, George, as a matter of fact, we prevented 124 accidents just last month. He stopped, thought for a minute, and 124. I didn't read about that anywhere. He says, of course not. That didn't happen. Because people that went to our presentations used some of the information that we had going out, and they didn't have an accident because of that. He said, well, how can you prove that? I said, how can you prove me wrong? So, you know, there's a double-edged sword there of how much we actually prevent by what we go through.
It is very important for us as FAASTeam volunteers and FAASTeam program managers to be out with people, to be out and amongst the people. When COVID came along, we were forced to change the way we do business, and we've incorporated some improvements actually in how we do it. With COVID appearing to be, you know, knock on wood, appearing to be on the wane, the FAASTeam is getting out there. The volunteers were always able to do their seminars as they were before COVID came along, but even that dropped off a little bit. We're starting to tick that back up again. We know that getting out there with people is paying dividends. It's very important. In fact, I dare say many of the aviation public, the people that attend our seminars and webinars, the only person they see in the FAA might be a FAASTeam program manager. It could very well be. For many years, I'd volunteered with the FAA before I joined them. I saw Obi Young, I saw Ben Coleman, and I saw Bill Hohenstein, all the three amigos as I call them. I saw these guys before I saw any FAA inspectors. I didn't see an FAA inspector until we had a fatal mishap at our flight school. And then I saw people I'd never seen before. Who are these guys? They're aviation inspectors. Well, who are they? Because I know the Benjis, and I know the Bills, and I know the Obis. Why aren't they here? Well, they have a different line of work. Our line of work in FAASTeam is accident prevention. We are the dentist trying to prevent cavities. That's what we do. We're just like that in the aviation industry. We're trying to prevent those accidents from happening, if possible, through education and through superior flight instruction and proficiency.
Bob, we have a few minutes, and I would like to develop something we spoke about earlier, but I think that it deserves mention. And the industry in itself is self-regulating. And a lot of FAA inspectors say, wait a minute, he can't say that. We regulate the industry. No, the FAA don't regulate the industry. Sorry, I have a lot of respect for the industry agency. But what you do is you represent the regulations, which I call standards, but it's self-regulating because, and there are folks that say, well, why don't the FAA prevent this? And why didn't the FAA get involved to stop that from happening? Be careful what you wish for, because the FAA could do it. It could be mandated that before you get in an airplane and take off, that you have to get permission from an FAA inspector there before you get in your airplane and go. Well, that can never happen. Oh, it could happen.
Nobody wants to see that happen, and the great Thomas Jefferson said, that government is best which governs the least. We don't want to solve people's problems. We will instead offer them information. We'll offer them education and even offer to help with that educational outreach. We will help, as FAASTeam, we'll help advertise their educational outreach and incentivize the attendance at those events. Let me give you a war story. We had a problem airport community, and we realized that a lot of accidents were originating at this airport community. I'll leave the name out of it. It's not important. What is important is how we address the issue. We assembled some experts. People, and it wasn't just me, I don't consider myself an expert. We assembled first responders. We assembled the firefighters, the policemen, the ambulance technicians. We assembled an NTSB accident investigator, and we assembled other people from the volunteer community that we run as a FAASTeam, our FAASTeam reps and lead reps, and we had them in the room making a presentation to this airport community. They assembled in a large group, and I was very glad to see that many people there. We told them, we're not here to solve your problems. You guys have to solve your problems. We are here to help you solve your problems. You don't want us solving your problems because you won't buy into the solution that we offer. We can fix these problems, but you won't like our solution. Well, this is to your point, Ben. What we want to see is people working with themselves, working as a community, working as a team, as a school, within an organization to solve their own problems. Yes, the FAA does regulation through publishing of regulation and enforcement of regulation, but it's up to the people out there who want to fly the right way. It's up to them to voluntarily comply with those regulations. Some are compulsory, but at the end of the day, people know that they have to do a flight review within the last 24 calendar months. They don't have to do one every 2 years. They have to do one within the last 24 calendar months. There's a lot of ways to comply with that regulation. We need people to trust one another. We need people to work with one another, and we are there as a team member on their safety efforts.
And there's nothing to prevent you from doing a flight review every 6 months.
Right.
There's nothing to prevent you from doing an annual on your aircraft every 10 months. I mean, you can do it early.
Sure.
I mean, you could do 3 a year. You don't
I
matter.
challenge the audience. Name 3 substitutions for a flight review. And I'm going to give you a freebie on this one. One of the substitutions for a flight review is a phase of wings.
Oh, that was going to be my answer.
You can't get me on that one today, Ben. Maybe next time. If you earn Basic Wings Phase 1 or Master's Wings Phase 1 million and anything in between, any phase of wings equals a flight review. And my regulation on that one is 6156 Echo.
Well, I'm not going to mess with that. I'm just going to go ahead and get another rating.
My goodness, you've just stumbled across another substitution for a flight review. If you earn a new certificate or rating through a practical test, you have met the requirements of a flight review.
Go ahead and dazzle us with your knowledge for the third.
How about getting a flight instructor renewal with a practical test or a flight instructor rating with a practical test? That counts as a flight review.
I like it. I like it a lot.
Because the flight instructor certificate is different from a pilot certificate.
Bob, regulations. They're standards, aren't they? Are they?
Regulations are possibly standards depending on how they're written, but standards are generally regulatory in their nature.
If someone goes and does something contrary to the standard and it's contrary to the regulations, what's the outcome for that? And who's there to overlook and oversee this situation that's evolving here?
A lot of times it's a person's own conscience. We have voluntary safety reporting programs where when crews run afoul of the regulations, a lot of times nobody notices it. A lot of times nobody notices it. It's off the radar.
Yeah.
But they know that something could develop if it's not kept in check. These guys are encouraged to voluntarily report their transgressions through programs like the NASA Aviation Safety Reporting System, ASARS, which is covered in one of the regulations. And the airline industry, they have programs like the ASAP program, which has actually been farmed out to our Part 141 schools. The larger ones anyway, they have the Aviation Safety Action Program where pilots can voluntarily report their transgressions, and in so doing, they actually purchase some limited immunity from regulatory enforcement against them. If somebody does find out, they often have a chance to report it through a number of mechanisms that could lead to counseling, remedial training, and in the worst cases, some sort of enforcement action. We generally, through our compliance program, we do not seek to pull a person's certificate just for an unintentional transgression.
And again, the FAA giveth, and the FAA can taketh away.
Can taketh away.
So here's the deal that, in holding that certification, that's a very, very responsible ticket to hold, if you will, if you're a certified airman for anything. But that means that you're signing up to, I'm going to do it by the book. I'm going to do it by the rules, because I don't want to tangle up. You're not going to tangle with Bob Jex, but you could tangle up with one of his buddies at FSDO, and you don't want to do that because it gets And I'll share quickly with you. Good, Larry and Lowe, this is quickly. I introduced a subject called the rule of 3 T's. Whenever you're messing with the FAA, you have got to remember the rule of 3 T's. Do you remember the rule of 3 T's?
I think the first rule of 3 T's was the truth, to tell the truth.
Tell the truth. Okay, that's the first group.
That's
of
the
three.
first one.
Okay, the second group of the 3 T's is
It might
tell the
truth.
And if you can make it to the third rung of the 3 T's, you got it made, because you're going to tell the truth. Tell the truth, even if the outcome is negative, it's going to happen. You can't flower it. You can't candy coat it. You can't. We don't make this stuff up, folks. This is real. That's going to wind up segment 2, and I can't wait for segment 3. It deals with maintenance primarily. Segment 3 coming up. Stay tuned.